Hi. So in the last lesson, we had created some parameters here for our animator controller to control the logic of how we get from one animation state to the next. And what we want to do later on then is to link these parameters to our own C# script that we're going to use to control the character and move her around. However, before we do that, we have to put her in a context, and we're going to have to put in some environment objects for her to walk around on. And if we go to our scene view here, it's worth taking a look at the character as it was imported, so that we can draw other graphics to the same with the same set of rules. First of all, the scale. She's 400 grid or 400 pixels high, which means she's 4 grid units. So if you just look at her height there, she's 1, 2, 3, 4 grid units next to our character, and that means then that she's actually 4 meters high in the sense of Unity's real world scale when importing 3D objects. So we need to bear that scaling in mind when we draw other graphics, right? So 200 pixels equals 1 meter. So we've doubled the regular scale. Another thing to think about is our point of view. So you can see the top of her shoe, and you can see the front of her leg, and you can see the side of her leg, and the same for every other single body part that we've got here in the backpack as well. It's pretty much a three-dimensional figure, even though she's drawn as a kind of a flat cartoon character. But we need to, she will look wrong if we just put in like a flat box for her to stand on, like you would in a platform game. We need to see a little bit of depth. You can see down here that the feet are spaced apart with a vertical offset. So it looks like there's this imaginary line of depth for having our character shown kind of receding into the distance, even though there is no perspective in this scene. It's an orthographic projection. So all of our z-axis lines, which aren't appearing on our grid here, but we're imagining them, they need to be parallel. That's the case with any orthographic projection. So if you were doing like a real-time strategy game, you might have an isometric 45-degree angle or a 30-degree angle for your X side of your building, and another one for your Z side of your building, and your Y lines are vertical. Whatever rules you go with, you stick to them throughout your whole project. So in the case of this one, Y is vertical, she's standing upright. X is horizontal. Pretty much you can kind of cue that from maybe the edges of the backpack, maybe the most rectangular thing that we've got there. But Z is drawn with a slight little bit of distance, right? So if we were, or at an angle. So if we were to use our grid as a guide for that angle, if I were to just draw a line from this bottom left corner to the top right corner of one of our grid pieces, it would be too extreme. It would look wrong, and it would look like it was the floor was kind of flipped up towards us a bit. So maybe if I drew an imaginary line here from the bottom left to the top right of the next grid unit over, that would look a little better. So we'd have that illusion of depth without having perspective, which means that our 2D graphics will all slot together. So I'm going to go into Photoshop, and I'm going to create just some placeholder graphics. So I said I wouldn't do a whole lot of finished artwork in front of you on this course, because again, it's mainly just a time issue. But what I think it's worth seeing is how to prepare placeholder graphics properly, so that I could say all that and then just go, oh, it's around 800 pixels, and just draw in an 800 pixel rectangle. But I wouldn't have accounted for depth, and I wouldn't have I wouldn't have something that really fits in with the point of view that I'm going with for this particular character. So what I'm going to do is just go to Photoshop, and I'm going to just create some 2D pictures of boxes that we can use as environmental pieces. I can draw over them and make them look a bit nicer later on. Just replace those files, but it's worth just setting them up as usable prefabs now in Unity. So I'll go to File and New, and 2048 by 2048. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that and hit OK. My grid units in Photoshop match Unity. So if you wanted to set that yourself, you'd find it under Edit, Preferences, Guides, Grid, and Slices. Just make sure that your grid is showing a grid line every 100 pixels. I'm actually showing a subdivision for every half of my grid units because, as I said in Unity, there I will be drawing across every two grid units. I'll be drawing diagonal Z lines across that. So I'm going to be bisecting every other vertical line. So I'm going to have subdivisions there. Whatever graphics software you use, try and find the snap and grid settings and match them as closely to your engine as you can. So I'm going to hit OK here. And under View, then just make sure that you are snapping to grid and showing your grid. So if I zoom in here, I'm just going to draw a box, a cube that's the same size pretty much as our character. So I'm going to just use the polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to draw well, actually I'll use the marquee tool and just draw the side that's facing us, so a wall next to our character that's the same size as our character, standing up and lying down. So that would be 400 pixels across and 400 pixels down, and I'm going to fill with the foreground color. The shortcut for that is Alt Backspace. So I'm going to just fill with this kind of light gray here. Pressed Alt Backspace and filled with the foreground color. So I'm going to move that down a little bit, and I'll duplicate that layer. So I'm going to drag that layer down here to this new layer and pull it up here. And I'm going to go Edit, Transform, and Skew. If I hover over, not one of the handles here, but just hover over there, you can see that it's not quite on the grid. Oops. So what we want to do is shift this over by 400 pixels, and then also scale it down. So I'm going to zoom in on this. Actually, don't apply the transformation just yet. I want to make sure that it's actually on the grid. I'm zoomed out a little far there. So and selecting Skew again. So that is our, it's kind of measuring, 4 diagonal units up that way and 4 across. I'm just going to make that a lighter color as well. So it's still selected. I'll just make it a slightly lighter gray and Alt Backspace to fill it again. I'll use the polygon lasso for this one, which is actually a little more accurate because that skew doesn't really snap. So I'm going to just join the dots of the grid like this, and I'll make this a darker color. Okay, so if I deselect that, that then becomes, actually I'll select both of these layers and merge them. So merge the layers, Control E, shortcut, that you use a lot in Photoshop, and move that up there. So I'm going to create some other placeholder graphics, and in the next lesson, I'll chop them up and use them in Unity. Okay, so see you in the next lesson.